All right, it's 1 o'clock. I think we can get started. Um, Chris, are you? I'm not able to share the slides. I select the slides. It says select your slide, and I did, but nothing shows up. Right? You don't see anything. It just
I
says
see a new deck is being shared.
right, and it just stops there.
Could this be because the first slide deck is a PowerPoint file and not a PDF? I saw from the downloadable meeting materials that the chair's slide deck is a PPTX file.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have to upload PDFs. I
believe there's
that real
also
fast.
a share screen option, so that might be an option.
Let's see here. I think that's not an issue. You can share PDF because I can click on any of the files and it's not showing up. Chris, do you want to see if you can bring up the slides?
Yes. One moment.
Because it just tells me to select, but nothing happens after that. We will start here momentarily, folks. There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Very good. So welcome everyone to IETF 120 here in Vancouver. My name is Sanjay Mishra, and my co-chair, Chris, is remote. And Kevin Ma, unfortunately, could not be here today due to personal reasons. So that said, let's get started. Next slide. Just go through a couple of administrative parts here of the slide. So note well, some of you are probably familiar with it as you have seen this before. Just reminding of the code of conduct and other things that are listed here. So feel free to have a look at it. Next slide. Note very well, this talks about these meetings are intended to be professional collaboration and networking. So let's keep it at that. There's other details here that you can skim through. Next slide. These are some of the meeting tips. If you're already here, then I think you're good. Tells you about keep your audio and video off if you're not speaking. Otherwise, all good. Next slide. Resources, agenda, and other things that also we can skip over. Next slide, please. Okay. You can skip over this one also. Covered that. All right, so here's where the agenda starts. So we've got two drafts that are under the IESG review. So we'll go through those two drafts first. Next slide, please. And then we have a number of working group drafts. There are at least 6 of these. So we're gonna spend bulk of time reviewing these documents, status and where things are. And then we will also go through private features. There are some open questions in the mailing list, and Arnan will talk through that. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to reach any decision, but we'll definitely talk through that. And then we want to save some time at the end for some topics that we want to cover today, particularly with either some of the documents that we have might impact the scope of the charter. So we want to talk through some of those items that are listed here. So we'll definitely save some time at the end to cover those. So that's the agenda that we have today. Anyone has any comments for anything on the agenda? All right. If none, then let's go back to the first draft, which is the, let's see if you can share that. Okay, Christoph, I see you there. So let's get started with your document.
Okay, so hello everyone. Yeah, so that's the quick update on the delegated credentials subsets draft. Next slide. So it's that's the current status. Okay, there's been a small update this morning, one additional ISG review, which is also good. I mean, no major objections. So there's still five reviews missing with yes or no objections in order to pass. And so far, all the comments were no major objections or concerns. So mostly precisions and reformulation in NITs. So that's the status. I have on the next slide, I have a recap a bit on the different changes since the 05 version. So that's the version from 2 meetings ago. So as I said, so there were many NITs and reformulations. One of the reviewers are not really don't agree on how to put the references of those two RFCs, the 7336 and 7337. One wanted to have it in normative, the other said it should be informational. So I think that at the end I will put it into informational because those are informational RFCs. I think it makes more sense. There was some updates in the delegated credentials object. So the first one was before the ISG review. We updated the structure a bit in order to encapsulate the delegated credential structure in the certificate entry as it is defined by TLS. And this allows also to encapsulate the whole certificate chain, which is quite useful. The reviewers also asked to put references to base 64 encoding, so that's not 46548, it's 4648, the RFC. Next slide. And then there was the reviewers asked for precisions for this should. So the should is the UCDN should timely refresh downstream CDN credentials via the MI. And so when there's a should, we should add reasons when we don't respect this should, and also talk about the consequences. So what I added is, so typically if you have just short-term one-shot deployments, or when you are just want to deprovision a downstream CDN, well, then you don't need to refresh those credentials anymore. And the consequences are, well, that the downstream CDN refuses the TLS connection when it doesn't have a fresh delegated credential. And the last changes were a bit more text in the security and the privacy consideration discussion. Mostly recalls about things that were already in the text somewhere else. So recalling that the default maximum validity period is 7 days according to the delegated credential RFC. Recalling that the encryption is mandatory for the private key in the my delegated credential object. So this is also already said in the text before, but just recall it here. And also warning regarding privacy. If someone is able to retrieve the delegated credential, this may allow to by the attacker that is getting the delegated credential to decrypt data sent by end users, and that this data may include personal information. So that's all.
So a quick administrative thing. So I think this is good. I just see that Francesca has posted on the chat that make sure to respond to the AD reviews individually, those that have commented on the draft. whether or not you have accepted their comments. And if you have, then just reply back to each of those individually. Do a reply all to each of those emails that have sent comments.
Okay.
And I also see last bit of comments have come in this morning, so you may not have seen those. Fairly straightforward, just some suggestions on modifying the text to make it easy to read. And I think it sounded like the suggestions made in the last review are good to follow and makes the document easier to read.
Okay.
And one more thing, I actually, at the onset of the meeting, I forgot to ask if anyone would be taking the meeting minutes since we've already started. So I'll take the responsibility now, and I'm going to be recording the meeting minutes. And Chris, since you're doing the sharing the slides, so I'll take over that part, and I'll do the meeting minutes here. Okay, very good. Any questions for Christoph? All right, let's move on to the next draft.
Do we have slides for the next one?
Which one is next?
Capacity insights.
Yeah, capacity.
Yes, there's slides for that.
Yeah.
It's a combined deck with capacity and protected secrets.
It's labeled capability. Confounded my search.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, since they're both one deck, I figure I'll just talk about both of them and go through the whole deck here. Shouldn't take very long. So we can just go to the first slide. So for those of you who are not familiar with capacity, I assume that you are new to this group. So I encourage you to read the draft because it's in its final stages now. We're past working group last call, and it's going to IESG review. And the latest draft, I believe, should address all comments that were outstanding from the mailing list, with the exception of the telemetry source types registry comment from, I believe, and excuse me if I mispronounce the name, from Karsten Borman, who pointed out that we discuss a registry of telemetry source types, but do not include it in the IANA section. So then that brought to mind the question of whether we should really be registering this at all, given the thank you. Whether we should be registering at all, given the single type and the the unlikelihood of future extension outside the scope of this draft. So it is telemetry, so perhaps it will be extended. I don't know, but it maybe seems a little premature to create a registry for this single generic type. But I don't know. I'm curious to hear thoughts from other people other than the reviewer. But with the exception of that one issue, all comments should be addressed. And if you can go to the next slide, please. I will be sending out replies to each of those individual emails to address all the comments in line, so that we can make sure we captured everything. So in either way we go on the registry thing, there obviously will be a revision 8 with some minor modification, one way or the other. So I'll pause there because that's before we're moving on to capacity.
Francesca.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
So I don't have a very strong opinion about it, but I think that IANA registries are not expensive to set up and maintain. So if there is the option to for more fields to be defined in the future, then just defining a registry would fix that. It's a cleaner solution, so I would go for that. It does require a little addition to the text with defining the registry and deciding what policy the registry should have. in terms of expert review, first come, first serve, specification required, etc. So a little bit of thinking there.
Okay. Well, so I
Um,
guess I might be interested in learning some more about that, because we already do have one registry defined in the document for or I guess there are additions to an existing registry. Yeah, because
Yeah,
there are other
those
additions
are
to the CDNI payload. So yeah, so what I'm going to be adding will be slightly different from the existing IANA section, because it's creating a new registry from scratch. So I assume there's
correct.
some RFC that defines how to do that.
Yes, I can
Okay.
point you to some examples of how it's done. What you do in the IANA section right now, you're actually registering values. When you define
Right.
a registry, it's a little bit more complicated because you have to
Okay.
decide what are like the rows of this, the columns of this registry, and what do they mean, and how, like, what's the, yeah, how do people register
Do we know where
things?
the CDNI FCI type registry is defined, which RFC that's
Yeah,
in? Because maybe I
I
can
can
just
point you
copy
to
from
it.
that. Okay.
I can post it in the chat.
Okay. Because I imagine, with the exception of who the expert reviewers would be, I think that would be largely similar in definition.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, I think we have our answer then.
Next draft?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You're ready to move to the next draft, you said?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So I believe, Chris, I think you were the only one to do a real review of this document so far. So I addressed a lot of your comments, but not all of them. We definitely need more review of this document for protected secrets. So I have this question on the slide: is anyone implementing it? As far as I'm aware, nobody has implemented it yet. So I imagine once that happens, there's going to be a lot more questions. So I would encourage anyone who's considering implementing it to maybe start thinking about this and read through the draft ahead of when you do that, because we don't want to get this locked in and then find out, as we're on our way to publication, that it has, major issues with it. So I'm not asking for last call or anything on this, because I think it needs more feedback would be my major point regarding this document. The biggest issue right now is one I think Sanjay raised, which was related to the trademark for HashiCorp Vault. So that is one of in fact, the only supported external secret store reference that's currently in the document. Though we do want to include potentially support for others, but if we're going to use HashiCorp Vault, we need to get permission to use their trademark. So I have that kind of on my list to go obtain permission for that, but I haven't done that yet, and I haven't talked to the right people. So that's also an outstanding thing. That's kind of a blocker before proceeding with this document. On the next slide, there is a changelog, which I didn't put in this deck for the capacity draft just because it's too long to fit on slides. This one was relatively compact, but if you're interested in the changelog for capacity, I'll refer you to the mailing list where I have a full changelog posted. And that's it for this deck. So I'll just, I guess, pause for questions before dismissing myself. Oh, and Chris, I know you had your hand up. So.
Yep, I'm in the queue with no hats on. I can commit to reviewing this in light of all the changes, and I appreciate all the updates. And we have we're going to have a conversation on the HashiCorp situation a little bit later on, so we can discuss that then.
Okay. All right. Great.
But if anybody else has anything else to bring to the mic.
All right. Well, thank you.
Hearing none.
Thank you, Ben. I believe next up is Alfonso. Cannot hear you, Alfonso. You may have to unmute. Nothing yet. No, we don't hear you. Don't hear you, Alfonso. Should we come back to you?
Sorry, it's working now?
Yes, it is now. Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
All good.
Sorry for this. Okay, so thank you, Chris, for sharing the screen, the slide. So please go to the next slide. Just a quick next one. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Just a quick review of the abstract of this draft. This related to a generic metadata object definition related to controlling edge access to resources in content delivery networks, specifically to the downstream CDNs, and specifically talking about cross-origin resource sharing, course protocol configurations, possibility to define the compression rules to the responses from the downstream CDN to the user agents, and defining client connections timeouts also between the downstream CDN and the user agents. Go next, please. So the changes, this is currently version 2, and the changes came mainly because Kevin Ma made a review and sent a few of several comments that we try to address. So basically, these are the changes. The main changes were we have references to the latest update of the WWG fetch specification that defined the course protocol that wasn't in the previous version. We do also other structured things and separate requirements and object definition for the course MI cross-origin policy objects. We have rewritten several parts of the requirement sections to try to have a more clear understanding of what course is, and with reference to the fetch specification and how this is related to the relationship between an upstream and a downstream CDN, and what is the need from the upstream to the downstream to configure this using these generic metadata objects, and defining valid values of the course response headers in the object definition that wasn't in the previous version. Then with the other different changes, but in the next few slides, I want to address several questions that I think were relevant from Kevin Ma, and that could be clarify others that read this draft. So please, we can go to the next one, Chris. Yeah. So one of the comments from Kevin was that it was not clear the concept of the origin in the document in the draft. And I understand that his concerns on this, because when we are talking about CDNs, downstream and upstream CDNs, on the terms of the origin, we usually think about the system where the CDNs are going to acquire the content that is going to be cached and served. But in course, the origin, the concept of origin is a request header that comes from the user agent to the element that is going to serve the content, in this case, a downstream CDN. When we are talking of origins, is that value of that request header that what we are talking about. So it's a completely different concept of in terms of course protocol, the usage of the origin name regarding what in CDN we typically understand as an origin. So we try to rewrite this section to have more clarifications on this difference of concepts, because it's important to understand the rest of the why the object is defined as it is, how we are using in the object definition the term origin. So well, I hope that now in this version is more clear. Please, next. Another thing, and this is a question that I think Kevin is not here, but I put this response in the mailing list, and well, I'm open to hear your opinions or now or in the mailing list is that there is a definition of a pattern property in the object definition that is exactly the same that it was defined for the RFC 8006 in the MI pattern match. So here maybe the question is, well, sorry, I see that is all the things there. The question here is that should we reference directly this property to the RFC 8006 definition of MI pattern match? Maybe that is the appropriate way. Well, I raised this as a question because I was not pretty sure, and I needed to send the update of the draft. But well, maybe in the questions we can discuss this if there's any strong opinion on this. Please go next. Other thing is that this was a question regarding specifically to how to use this generic metadata object when defining from the upstream to the downstreams the course configuration, and is regarding to the two main properties of the document, that is of the object, that are the allow origin list and the wildcard return. So Kevin, from the text, it seems like he understood that it was maybe some kind of duplication, or that it was redundant to have both configurations, both properties. We have tried to explain in the new version that a low origin list is a pattern match, how we have described before, and only if this origin request header that comes in the request from the user agent matches any of the patterns that are included in the low origin list, then the property wildcard return is taken in consideration. Because if that happens, if there is a match, then the Townsend CDN is going to return a response header based on the CORS protocol, and the value of this response header is conditioned on this property. So we need both properties. One is the match validation of the request header. The other is how the Townsend CDN is going to generate the response header. So I hope that now is more clear also. Please, next. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Can you go back to
Yep.
the previous two slides? One more. Yeah. On just so that I understand your question here, on the first bullet.
Yeah, the others are, sorry, the others are copy paste. It's just the first one. Yeah.
So you're asking, should we reference it directly? Can you clarify what exactly did you mean?
Yeah. So there is this allow origin list property in the MI cross origin policy object includes a pattern that is the definition in the draft is exactly the same definition that is in the MI pattern match in the RFC 8006. So I understand that is really the comment from Kevin Ma was that we need to try to not to do definitions of different patterns structures. Yeah, and I agree. The thing is that it's exactly the same structure on the RFC 8026. Then my question is that then in this object that we need to have this pattern, should we reference to the MI pattern match definition in RFC 8026, as it's exactly the same definition? I guess that probably the most common response will be yes, but this is what I wanted to raise for this.
Yeah. So I did see your document there. So yeah, I think I agree that you should reference the document RFC 8006 and then the MI pattern match as defined in the section 415, as you said. So we can, so do that, and Kevin can confirm. But I think that you seem to be on the right track there.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Sanya. Okay, so I will try to finish quick. Well, about the client connection control, where there were some questions. Those questions were not responded in the mailing list. I think we are going to send it probably tomorrow. But just to let it the responses here. About there was a question in the definition of the client connection control object that is talking about optimizing performance. This kind of object tries to set different configurations in the downstream CDN that can be used as part of maybe MI pattern match, path match, in a definition for specific paths when you want to maybe have different paths for different devices, and then you can set different client connections configurations. So you are able to define these properties more specifically for different devices. That is very convenient several times, because the content provider usually have different client applications that could have different restrictions. So it's very convenient that the upstream is able to configure the downstream CDN in a way that it will fulfill these restrictions of the different devices. Also, in the future, when we have the MI processing stages, this is something that we have finally in the CDNI, you could define configurations based on user agent or other values of request headers or any other element to define also different configurations in the downstream CDN. So also, although the object doesn't seem to be very dynamic, the thing is that combining this with other techniques that we have and we will have in the CDNI specifications, you could be able, from the upstream CDN perspective or the content provider, to have this dynamic or flexibility in the configurations of the client connections. So please go next. This goes in the same line. Please next. Yeah, well, just some general questions and I'm finishing. Kevin was asking to separate examples in some of the object definition. We did it in one section because there were two examples, but in the other sections there was only one example. So I'm questioning this because I saw in many others CDNI draft and specifications that when there is one example, I don't see there are separate sections. So I would like to understand if there is something specific for this draft that he wants to have different sections, or I don't know if there is a common way to do this that maybe I'm missing. So, well, I don't know, maybe we can just discuss this on the mailing list. So, yeah, it's just trying to address that comment, but to let that question here. And that's it. So I'm open for any question.
So on the last one, you're saying that you want to take that to the mailing list to just confirm if you want to use separate examples or just keep it in the same section?
Exactly. Yeah, I will. Well, because this was a comment from Kevin Ma, unless there is some other policy that maybe I'm missing that needs these examples to be in a separate section, but I'm not sure if we have other documents that include the examples in the sections, why it's needed to have this in a separate section for just one example. I just wanted to be sure that I understood the question from Kevin.
Okay.
There are some hands, I think.
For now, you can leave it as it is in your document. So I think it was more of a question of ease of readability. I think readability. So, but for now, just leave it as it is.
Okay.
And we also see Glenn and Pankaj in the queue here. So Glenn.
Yeah, I have a comment right on that exact topic, because when we show the cache control metadata doc coming up next, the way we've handled examples there are right in the section of the documentation for new MI object. There's a very brief example that doesn't do a hell of a lot more than just show the use of that object. But then at the very end of the document, there's a section called informative examples that show the use of that object more in context along with other objects to, solve some problem. So that seems like a good way to do it, I think, when there is a need to not only show the just most basic syntax use of the thing, but to show it in some sort of more complex context.
Mm-hmm.
And I called that informative examples.
Okay.
Okay, Pankaj?
Thanks for calling on me. Just wanted to make a quick comment about the Kevin Ma's comment that this particular object should be just made mandatory versus being optional. And I think the long-term intent for client connection control was not just to provide that one property that exists today, which is the keep alive, but also a couple of other properties. As an example, packet pacing. And we chose initially to just kind of keep this object simple enough with just one property. And as implementation and as adoption kind of increases, we plan to actually add more properties to better manage the client connection aspect of it. So that's the reason why it is kind of like optional. And also that not every CDN and content provider, which is a client, ask for these changes. And so when you have this super object and then many other multiple properties within that, being able to have that as optional actually kind of helps out in the long term.
Okay. Okay, so suggestion is to just keep that as optional, and that's the reason you're saying.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Alfonso. So we have the CDNI cache control metadata. Glenn?
Yep, here I am. I'll share my screen here. Do I get to choose which screen to share? Hold on. Did it just, oh, I'm requesting to share. You don't see my screen yet, do you?
Not yet.
No, I'm attempting to locate the button that allows me to let you. There.
Okay, now I get to choose the window I want. So hold on just a second. Okay, I think that did it. Oh, hold on just 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay, you can see my screen there?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I'll zoom it up a little bit. This, okay. So yeah, so on CDNI cache control metadata version 2, we'll just kind of quickly go through some of the key comments that came in from Sanjay and how we addressed them in the updated draft. I'll kind of pong back and forth here. General comment about, open caching, the term being used. So in the introduction here, I went ahead and added a little description about open caching systems serving the role as DCDNs, and they require cache control instructions from upstream, and that here open caching systems are essentially DCDNs that use CDNI standards for configuration and traffic delegation. So that just gives a little bit of context about what we're talking about for people who would just come at it from the CDNI point of view. Where are Oh yeah, so all of the examples didn't have titles below them. This is sort of a bit of a fallout. Let me just sort of scroll down to one or two. Right, this figure 1, figure 2, this is just a fallout of how we generate these IETF drafts from our current Google Doc format for the SBTA sources. We'll fix that up in a future version of that so that we can have a little title under each one where instead of just figure 1, figure 2, it would have a bit of a description. What I did in the meantime, though, is right next above each example, it says in the following example and sort of summarizes what's going on. So hopefully that should be sufficient, at least for now. That covers that one. All right, the use of the terms origin and client. This sort of touches on a little bit what Alfonso ran into. Here, we really do mean the use of the word origin as it's used in the CDN world. And what I did is, you'll see I changed wherever we used origin, I replaced it with the phrase upstream source, because in CDNI terminology, we really are talking about the source, that RFC 8006 uses. So is that an acceptable term here, upstream source?
I see Chris join the queue here.
Yeah, no hats. I suspect that all of the terms that we want to use here are defined in the HTTP semantics document. And I would suggest that we align with the HTTP semantics doc.
You want to send me a link to that? I'll probably find it somewhere, but.
Yep, I'm pulling it up.
Okay, and I'll make a note of that. All right, so we may wordsmith that a little bit more, but that's the idea. I think it seemed to flow pretty well doing it like that. Moving ahead. Oh, there was a comment about the abstract. Are we adding to RFC 806? I did correct the language here. I believe what I have is more clear, Sanjay. This specification adds new objects to complement the basic object that's already in RFC 8006. So I think that covers what we were trying to express there. Moving on. We already talked about some of this, adding section number. These are just little nit things. Yeah, I made it clear whether the capabilities, and in the intro, if you read close, each of these I just updated the language a little bit to make it a little bit clearer whether we're referring to UCDN or DCN capabilities. So I think that should address the comments. There were some ambiguous sentences here that were just cleaned up, language thinned out and cleaned up a little bit. Dynamically constructed cache keys. How did I resolve? Hold on one second. Oh, yeah. So let me go right to that section here. Yeah, so right now, references to things like the metadata expression language, I give a link here to an SVTA doc. That SVTA doc that describes the metadata language is currently an individual draft in the CDNI working group. We can do in a future version of our little script, again, that converts to the IETF RFC XML format, we could change this SVTA link to an IETF link. And would it be appropriate to be referring, there's a question for Chris and Sanjay, to docs that are currently IETF individual drafts? Whereas this SVTA doc is actually published.
Yeah, so if the document is published at the SVTA, we'll have to ask. There is a process by which we can issue a normative dependency on a document there. Some of that process is going to depend on whether the SCTA is considered a standard, an SDO, standards definition organization.
It is.
And I would not necessarily assume that it is. Yeah. And so the process of having a normative dependency in a protocol definition in a proposed standard to a non-standard document is not typically considered acceptable. Like, and there are exceptions.
Here,
but
you can see here I did have that one in the normative list, and the other SVTA ones is informative.
Right. And processing stages can't be in the informative list. You have to read the or in the MEL. You have to actually know both of those in order to implement it. And so
in this case for cache control, MEL was normative because it needs to be there. You can't do computed cache key without it. Whereas
correct.
Processing stages is here in cache control, just because I use them in the informative examples, but it's not key to cache control.
Yep. And we're going to have this exact same problem with HashiCorp later when we discuss it. But yes, proposed standards track documents cannot, generally speaking, reference non-standards documents in a normative way, which is required here.
Okay. So this normative reference, this one right here, I could certainly put in a reference to the IETF draft. Would that be appropriate, or can that not be?
That is appropriate, but it doesn't.
Even if it's an individual draft.
For now, yes. However, that would make this a dependency of that other draft, and we could not progress this document until unless that other draft were adopted by the working group, determined to be in scope of the charter of the working group, and determined to and this couldn't be published until that came out.
Okay, fair enough. So
it's a real dependency.
Yeah. So Alfonso, I'm glad you're here listening. I put a Git issue in there for us for our little document converter for the next round of things for the next IETF. We can take a certain set of these SBTA docs and turn them into IETF draft references. That should take care of that for next time.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, moving ahead here. There were many cases where we used the term client, and we did go ahead and change that to user agent. So you'll see here, and I think that's generally what we meant here when we use the term client. So that should be appropriate and in line with IETF language.
I would double check that against the 9110.
Yeah, I think user agent UA. I think that was what Sanjay had already mentioned that for us. We'll double check. These were just
the
little
HTTP,
things.
The HTTP group spent a long time getting agreement on those words, and there's a lot of value in what they selected.
Yeah. All right. Then the other little things here were nits, and then finally there was an IANA consideration. So right now, as in most of this set of documents on from our configuration interface, we just have done this. So we've listed out these are the new objects. They will be specified here. The comment from Sanjay is you got to do more than that, right? You've got to have a subsection for each payload type, and so we'll deal with that next time around. The other thing I wanted to mention, since we were talking just about examples, excuse me for scrolling quickly, in line with the definition of any object are these very brief examples that don't do a hell of a lot except show the syntax of using it. And then there is an informative example section here that shows a couple of more complex use cases of the cache policy object in the context of some more complicated stuff, in this case with processing stages. That's all I got. So I think that kind of gets us through the whole thing. And did we want to, I think we had originally talked about moving for working group last call, or do we want to wait until the next round of work that we do to take care of some of these things that we still have dangling?
I don't think this document can necessarily go to working group last call with the down reference as it stands.
Okay. That one, this one right here, that's no good.
Yes. And Sanjay's in the queue.
Well, I think, Chris, you already addressed, so I'm going to take myself out of the queue.
Okay. That's it for me.
Thank you. And I believe we have Pankaj's 2 drafts. Let's see in which order. I think the client, and then the client access, and then the source access.
Yeah, that's the 2 documents.
All right.
I don't really have a presentation that I had shared earlier.
Yeah. So Pankaj, what I did was for the client access control, I thought it would be easier to just go through the comments that Chris had. So I posted them here as a PDF.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I basically kind of did the same thing and inserted my answers. So I can just kind of read the answers I have and for different ones. Yeah.
Yep.
So let's see, making sure I look at the screen share and also my notes here. Uno momento. Okay. Yeah, so Chris, thanks for the review of this document. Your first comment here, as I go through this screen share, the document seems to be in seems to have three semi-related purposes. I think, and you're kind of referring to the TLS, the location or the IP, and I forget the third one, client access control, which is the auth side of things. Sorry, yeah. Where I guess like our thinking here was that these are all different kind of like, I guess, like avenues that control how a user agent can actually connect to a server or a CDN. And so, yes, sure, they are different with respect to an auth and auth kind of a setup versus a time versus an IP, but they were all kind of like defining the restrictions or the avenues in which a user agent can or cannot connect. And that's why they were all kind of grouped into a single document. There wasn't any other document that actually allowed for that kind of a structure. Source access control is about the origin side of things, and different other documents exist. But this was the only place right now that allowed to collect them all together into a single place and talk about them as different ways in which we can gate access to access of a user agent to a server. So that was kind of like the rationale or the thinking behind that. Open to your feedback, comments.
Yeah, no, I think that's mostly okay, as long as they're all appropriately in scope. The last one, however, is the first two describe gating access. The last one just describes the details of the TLS connection. And I have to wonder if maybe that last one might actually fit better in the edge control.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. I think maybe the edge control is probably the better one. And I hadn't really kind of brought up these comments internally with the SVTA group. And so for the answers I thought appropriate for this particular conversation, I kind of brought this up. But I think I tend to agree that edge control metadata might be the right place for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, move on to the next one, which is para 2, the delivery time. The delivery time in place definition seems mostly fine. You are actually asking for the domain to be used here. And yeah, I definitely agree, and I'll rectify that.
Alphonse is in the queue.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chris. Well, was related to your previous comment on if having this object in the edge control draft, it's more a protocol question, is how will be the way to do that, as this is a draft and the other is a working group draft. Is just to add it to the working group draft, or is any other
The
way
good
to do
news
this?
is that we just adopted client access control.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
okay,
yeah,
sorry for that.
They're
okay.
definitely both working group docs.
Okay, perfect. Understood. Thanks.
Okay, I'll continue. Paragraph number 3 that starts with in the time window ACL extended definition. There is a reference to SVTA 2032, which is an SVTA document for the processing stages metadata. Yes, if we do adopt that particular draft, then yes, the reference needs to be updated. I think it goes in line with the previous session with Glenn and using SVTA document as a normative reference. So yes, accurate that. I think we'll look to use IETF reference here instead of the SVTA one. And yes, it seems like it's a normative reference, which is the next one. So, and I'm jumping. The next sentence, block of sentence in that same third paragraph starts with likewise. This is an informative reference. And it should really be a normative because terminating objects is a concept that needs to be understood. Yes, it's a great catch, and I believe that this should be a normative reference. So we'll update that. And then because it's a normative reference, we'll link it to an IETF draft rather than an SVTA name.
Yes.
Moving on to the fourth paragraph, In this section that defines the TLS parameters, the protocols are enumerated, TLS1, TLS2, so on and so forth. I believe, yeah, it kind of makes sense that it should be referencing a registry rather than just actually enumerating those values there, so that from a forward compatibility point of view, as new versions come in, they can just be referenced through the registry rather than updating these documents. Moving on to the next paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph, which starts with likewise the TLS cipher suites. It's basically the same comment about using a registry rather than listing those individual string or enumerate those values. So we'll kind of update that and make sense as well. The next paragraph after that, which is, and lastly, the client auth metadata seems to be a bit of a stub. Seems to have, and I'm paraphrasing because it's a larger paragraph here. The client auth metadata seems to be very similar to MI auth. And right now, it seems like it's just a bit of a stub. So what gives? So where we were headed with that, the intent was that for better or worse, if you look at the MI source control or MI source, it has a property called acquisition auth. So basically, MI source is an object that defines all the properties on how to connect to an upstream or a origin server or a server. And one of those properties also includes acquisition auth. And so inspired by that, it seemed to make sense to define one single instance of an auth and auth z kind of an approach for allowing a client to connect to the server or a user agent to a server. And that's where defining, and the auth and auth z is basically encapsulated via mi.auth. But to kind of follow the approach of mi.source.acquisition auth, it felt that we could follow a similar approach of defining mi.something something representing a client dot delivery auth, and delivery auth is a property right now within client auth metadata. So that was kind of the intent behind that, and also so that we can have just one auth and auth z object rather than allowing for many such objects to be defined. So I think the flow just seemed to fit well and be analogous to how source.acquisition auth is defined. Similar was intent to define client.delivery auth. So that was kind of the thinking behind that. Now, of course, right now it's just a stub. The intent was to actually define CAT, Common Access Token, auth, mi.cat auth. But the spec wasn't done on the CAT side of things. So the object model that was flushed out in mi.client.metadata was pulled out. So that's why it's a stub at the moment. I think once we kind of get the cat auth object defined, we will also give examples such that header auth and AWS v4 auth, these are two existing objects, and I forget which. Let me see, where are they defined? Just one moment, please. Yeah, these are defined under source access control metadata. So source access control metadata allows for two different auth modes today, which is header and AWS 4 auth. And I believe that these are just auth that do not need to be relegated just to CDN to origin. They can be just universally used between an actual user agent to a CDN server as well too. So together, these three kinds of auth objects can be pulled out separately into a different document as well too. So that's kind of like the plan there.
That sounds like that sounds like an excellent action item here.
Okay, cool. The last line, the introduction might call out that we are defining new HTTP protocols as well. I wasn't quite sure what this meant, so if you can actually elaborate, and I think Chris, this was your email.
Yes, the document has an IANA consideration section that defines the list of HTTP protocols, which you need to do. The registry is the correct way of doing that, but the only place that is referenced is in the IANA considerations, and I know that everybody always very carefully reads the entire RFC, including the IANA considerations. But in the event that somebody didn't, it's handy to call out that part of the purpose of the document is to register that for use within these specs.
Okay, understood.
And I should have been more careful with my language. We are not actually defining new HTTP protocols here. We're simply registering a list of existing HTTP protocols for use in our systems.
Yeah, agreed, and which is accurate. Yeah, we are not defining new ones.
Heavens no.
Yes, not at least in open caching or CDNI. Yeah. That actually kind of wraps up what I had to share, and that as replies to the feedback received so far. So thank you for the feedback, and if there are any open questions, I'll take those.
So not a question, but just to confirm, basically you'll respond back to the mailing list, or you're going to just update the draft?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. That I'm sorry, that's fair. That we should have that exchange on the mailing list, so that there is agreement on that mailing list as well, and then we'll reflect those changes in the drafts and publish a new one.
Okay, great. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan then.
Should we move on to the next one, which is source access control metadata?
Yes. I know there are no comments on it yet, but it's a good idea to walk through what you have in mind in that document.
Yeah. So can I screen share, or would you like to? Well, yeah, I can screen share.
Yeah.
Hit the share request button.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now the application will record. Right. Oh Lord. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. I need to click through a few buttons on my system. Screen share permissions. Okay. Okay, I think that worked. Brave tab, no. Actually, can I do entire screen? Might be better. We'll give it a try. Okay, I'm sharing my entire screen. Oh no, I don't think that worked. Let me try one more time. Accept. I wanted you to. Okay. Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Is there a link I could bring up?
Unfortunately not. How about this? Maybe I can just talk through the email comments. I don't really have a whole lot of replies for that, similar to the previous one. So I'll just talk to that. I apologize. I'm unable to do screen share. For the document, I want to screen share. So there was an email from June 12th from Chris for the source access control metadata. And then there was a second email, same June 12th, from Kevin Ma. So I'm going to just address those two. Chris's comment was that feels that the draft document is two separate parts of documents that have been glued together, and these are section number 3 and section number 4. Section 3 talks about everything as it pertains to connecting and working with a source, the origin side. And section 4 talks about the authorization aspects, authn.z aspects, that the source, that the CDN will use to talk to a source or upstream origin. So again, Section 3 talks about how a CDN talks to an origin. Section 4 talks about the auth and auth aspects of that. Yes, and that's how the document is constructed. And as I mentioned in the previous one, there is header auth and AWS v4 auth as two different authentication mechanisms defined that allows a CDN to talk to an origin. And there's no reason why we cannot use CAT, common access token, or something else as well too. And no reason why all three or n number of these cannot be used between a user agent and a CDN. So I think it kind of makes sense that we will move all these auth mechanisms under a separate bucket, and then hence potentially pull these out, which is section number 4, out of the source access control metadata. So you will end up with just section number 3, and section 3 will just be talking about how a CDN talks to an origin, the failover handlings, and those kind of scenarios. So that's basically the answer for that. And then the second feedback was section 4 looks like it should probably be defining a registry of authorization schemes. This would allow third parties, including the SVTA, to publish specifications. It also, that feedback also continues into appropriate normative reference for AWS v4. I don't really have a comment on this per se, but I'm open to a little bit more detailed feedback from the chairs here.
Yeah, so basically this is the same problem that we have with HashiCorp and the same problem that we have with SVTA references. Basically, we have a normative reference to a document that is not the result of the consensus of the IETF. And there are a couple of solutions here. One of which may be simply defining a registry and allowing any third party that needs to use a specification required in order to publish the doc. But I don't see an excellent route forward on a normative reference to AWS in this doc.
Yeah, agreed. I'm not sure how to proceed forward as well too, but we'll kind of connect offline on this. Should I move on to the email from Kevin?
Briefly, we're running out of time.
Oh, sure. I think this was a comment about MI auth to use payload types rather than a separate registry for auth types. I think it's similar in line to the AWS v4 auth comment as well too, how to register this or not. And then finally, Kevin's one comment for which I have a reply for is to have a mi.auth prefix for all these different objects. And so we already have one for header auth and cat auth as well too. So that kind of makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
The only comment I have, Pankaj, is if you can also respond back in the mailing list to comments from both Chris and Kevin. And then,
yes,
then based on that, hopefully we'll get some more responses back and then decide the next steps.
Yes, sounds good. Yes, will do.
Thank you. Okay, I think this should be the triggers document. All right. Jay, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. We're covering the update for the control interface and triggers, second edition, otherwise known as RFC 8007 BIS. So there's been a lot that is, by the way, how do I control the slides on this one?
You tell me to press the button.
Okay. Well, please, please press the button then. Okay. Gotcha.
I think I gave you control.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So there's definitely been a lot going on with this particular document. When we met in Brisbane, we were talking about draft number 11, and we are on draft number 14 at this point. The slide gives a very brief summary of some of the changes that have happened. We published a version 12 draft on June 7th. That was mostly just a cleanup draft before we moved on to a much larger set of changes under version 13. This also included the cleanup for time policy. Version 13 incorporated the changes requested from SVTA, Streaming Video Technology Alliance, specifically for the cache management interface, and aligning it with that particular document that they were working on. And then on 2 days later, on July 7th, and just before the deadline for IETF, we did a cleanup of version 13 in a version 14 draft that largely addressed a set of changes that I posted to the CDN mailing list prior to that point. So if you access the materials for the presentation, you'll see that there's a link that gives you the complete set of changes between 11 and 14. So just looking at each one of these individually, the first of these, the version 12 change, as mentioned, this was mostly a cleanup, but it also addressed a major topic from the Brisbane meeting with regard to date local time and local time window from time policy. As some of you may recall, we discussed this on the mailing list, and we had made a decision to remove this feature because of the fact that we didn't see any really strong use cases for it, and we didn't get any feedback against it. So we moved forward with that change, and that was committed in V12. Otherwise, we addressed some minor spelling errors that we had found in the document. There was some formatting cleanup, mostly with regard to non-ASCII characters and lines that were greater than 72 characters with regard to the diagrams and the JSON examples. And we had updated the schema and some of the obsolete RFC references. There were some, since this came from RFC 8007 and a lot has changed since that point, there were some RFC changes from 7230 and friends over to 9110 and friends. So nevertheless, that gave us a clean copy, what we consider to be a clean copy going into the version 13 changes. And again, there's a link here that will just give you the changes for version 12 at the bottom of this slide. So the version 13 changes are probably the most consequential. So this one introduced 8 major improvements and features. Alan is going to be helping to discuss many of these changes over here, but all of these were with regard to alignment with the SVTA cache management interface 1.0. So along the way, we ended up identifying yet more grammatical, spelling, and formatting issues. So we corrected this as we made the changes, and the diff for the version 13 from version 12 is at the bottom of this slide here. And then finally, 2 days later, we published the V14 draft on July 7th. This addressed a list of issues that I posted to the CDNI mailing list. Probably one of the more consequential changes that we made was actually with regard to some of the language around downstream CDN, upstream CDN, and transit CDN, and the way that these were phrased in the document. So we made some changes to make sure that the way that we referred to this was consistent through the document, and it resulted in a number of changes in this particular version here. The other thing that we had realized that we had omitted from the version 13 commit was the language around CI trigger command. So there were some changes here in order to improve the restfulness of the API, in which we made these changes, but for some reason they got lost in the commits that we made in version 13. So we applied that along with some corresponding payload language with regard to CI trigger command, create, and modify. So the diff of these changes from 13 are available from the link at the bottom of the slide here. So that brings us to the version 13 changes. So as mentioned, there are 8 new improvements to the spec with regard to this. We moved from a HLS dash and Microsoft Smooth Streaming playlist format to a more flexible object list concept that not only included these, but allowed us to specify lists of objects in text and JSON form. We have a new execution policy extension that allows for specification of dependency, priority, and urgency in terms of triggers. Triggers used to be able to act upon just the public URLs, and now we have amended it to optionally also act upon private URLs if specified and supported by the downstream CDN. We've made changes to the RESTful interface. So this represents the first API changes that we have made in this whole overall effort here. We have separate CIT endpoints for metadata versus content. So this gives us the ability to use this in the future for being able to pre-position and purge metadata configuration. So giving us a little bit more flexibility and having separate endpoints for that. We have made the CDN identifier optional. This was an identifier based off of AS number that we determined was kind of not necessary in all use cases. We now have label-based trigger collections to allow for greater flexibility for reporting collections of triggers. And we now have some extended trigger status reporting, both for reporting the error objects that might have an error, and also what a particular trigger actually matched and acted upon here. So a lot of different changes that went into this. So I'm going to pass this over to Alan, who will go through each one of these in detail.
Hello. How do I move slides here? So Jake, could you do this for me, or you kind of?
I can definitely do it for you if you want. Just say next slide, and I'll advance it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think just before I delve into the details of the features, I think what we really see this important draft, because sort of we see triggers kind of as foundational framework for some other work that already has been either presented in CDNI or future work around cache management and also in the future orchestration. So it's really important to make this sort of good, solid framework that we can build upon. So we plan to do that. So these features kind of stem from that, from desire to kind of to build solid framework that is operational and functional for kind of massive use in the future. So I'll talk to object list, right? So again, we're moving from ability to just address playlists, which was in the previous draft, kind of up to the 12, to ability also to build, first of all, use text format for simplicity, but also add JSON structured payloads so we can provide structured information and include video, not just video payload, but also kind of generic kind of a combination of video, non-video objects, or just even prepositioning and purge of validation of object with a non-video at all. And this can be used in the trigger, embedded with the trigger. So part of the JSON kind of trigger payload, you can embed object list, either JSON or playlist. or you can actually point to external URL where such object list or object lists would be stored, and even multiple layers. So let's say playlists of playlists and things of this nature. Out of the gate, 5 types. 3 types we had before: HLS, MPEG-, and HSS, and adding JSON and text. And I think JSON is particularly interesting because we have in the future ability to enrich it with additional information for provide more information about the objects in a structured way. Also, we added ability to use object list not just as input into operation, which was intentional. Initial intention is to provide an option to configure for, hey, preposition this, but also use object list in response. So, for example, when I'm referring to playlist and DCD as a UCD, and DCD may come back and say, okay, you gave me this playlist, that's what I derived out of it. So, or these are the errors encountered in this list. So it's kind of really generic vehicle for describing, long lists of objects in conversations between UCDN and DCDN bidirectional. Next slide. Execution policy, right? So also a core feature. Prior to that, kind of triggers really hand waved a bit around how triggers can be executed. What are the constraints? DCDN had a lot of liberty in how to batch process that, do that immediately, do it 2 days later. So it's certainly a need for UCDN to ask for stricter constraints on execution. After a lot of discussion analysis, we came up with three attributes that you can be added as part of execution policy. First is dependency. So only do this after you completed that, right? So the kind of triggers being dependent on one another. For example, only do preposition after you complete a purge, so you don't do things concurrently. Priority also, when you DCDN, when you pick up triggers from the queue, which should come first. So just priority for pickup, and separately is urgency. Okay, kind of do this immediately. So not just dictating the order, but also that it's immediate, and if it's not possible for whatever reason to do so immediately, DCDN would inform you CDN accordingly. Hey, you're asking for something, but I'm unable to because of the business logic, or I'm unable to do that because it's dependent on a trigger that I can complete fast enough. But at least things that are urgent, there are certain things that can be urgent in CDN, like purge now. This is really bad version of the file I published. So we have a way to communicate urgency and kind of also communicate rejection if urgency is not feasible. And that's kind of core extension using same policy extent mechanism that exists in triggers CITV2, and we find very useful. Next slide. Published in private URLs, right? So this is also Jane mentioned that. Not just also, I think it not just spells out 2 options, but also the new draft kind of spells in more detail what does it mean. So when you say URL, what are the implications of processing particular triggers, even if it's an existing published URL? What we're saying now is that, if you are referring, you as DCDN, if you're asking DCDN to preposition the URL, what is required processing there, right? And we really handling published URL requests for prepositioning, for example, as a user directed request. So as if a user requested that. So all the metadata objects that may exist within DCDN and control behavior here, starting from client access control, cache control metadata, source access control metadata, processing stages, things of that nature, they have to be processed before. So, for example, by way of example, importantly, so let's say you have to transform URL to generate cache control key, and that's something that cache control metadata dictates. Or to access origin when you're doing preposition, you have to use this authentication information provided, or rewriting and things of this nature. So even if you're not doing private URL, you're doing publish, which is a default, we are spelling out what the support means. And private URL implies that basically DCDN would have to bypass all of that and use URLs as provided without any processing.
Apologies, Sanjay. Did you have a question, comment here?
Yeah, a quick clarification question. Alan, the middle box that you show there, the DCDN with the 4 boxes there, are they just an example, or you are drawing dependencies on all of the 4 boxes that you're showing? Because they are all right now drafts in different stages within the working group, and some of them are not yet adopted also.
Absolutely. No. So we're not dictating that. We're saying whatever metadata is in place, that has to be invoked. And I think in the future, some of that metadata kind of will define it better or define additional metadata objects. So what we're saying is, if you are asking for published URL, whatever is there that would be invoked for user request would have to be invoked for published URL request.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is that, is this a dependency or this is an example?
Specific, it's an illustration. It doesn't dictate how exactly that's done. It's illustration only for this deck. We're not describing how the metadata should be processed. Certainly not our place to do that. What we're saying is, for example, if you have metadata like this, that would apply to user requests, and you see on the diagram the user request on the bottom. So same processing would imply, and we're saying, well, whatever it is that is defined would have to apply.
Okay.
Yeah. And
briefly,
URL is a capability that has to be advertised, and that's something that can be only requested in the trigger subject to capability advertised by DCDN. Next slide. RESTful API, right? This is important. Kind of triggers sort of its old API, so some of the semantics was not RESTful initially, or kind of, so there are some areas where we look for kind of align it better for RESTful semantics, and also importantly allow this to be encoded as an open API, because ultimately what we want to use this spec is to build open APIs that can be kind of just used, right, for integration. And to do that, the several changes have to be done. So now I think the language also is better aligned, maybe not fully yet, because it's quite a mess of text, and some of that is maybe left over, but we did make an effort to align it end to end with RESTful semantics. And the RESTful semantics basically says that trigger is a resource that DCDN creates based on UCDN requests, and then such resource can be created, updated, and deleted using RESTful commands. And things that we allowed and was not feasible before changed. So for instead of encoding this in some sort of custom JSON payload, we're using just straight HTTP verb, so it'd be post and then kind of with this URL spec, and cancellation is not also with some sort of custom JSON object. Instead of that, we say we are changing to cancel a trigger. Now you have to modify trigger spec and indicate what is the desired state. So if you're now desiring the state to be canceled, you would indicate that, and that will be processed as a modification request as opposed to custom non-REST command. So that's one thing. So cancellation is done by changing the trigger state. And the other thing we're also allowing now, which was not allowed before, is that as long as trigger was not accepted for execution, you can also modify trigger spec. So you can actually change errors in the specification, and that is accepted, and as long as DCDN didn't accept it for execution. Once this is already being executed, then that such request will be denied. So those are the RESTful changes, and I think as a result, we believe we'll be able to build kind of a full RESTful open API out of this. Next slide.
Just a quick comment here. That given you have 6 more slides to go, and we've got a couple of other presenters plus the chair discussion, so maybe if you can speed up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm working the time. Yes, absolutely. So I think with 10 minutes so far, so we're still good. One of the goals is alignment with open caching. In open caching, we actually have 2 separate interfaces for managing metadata and content. So to make this possible, we made some changes. So FCI advertising includes endpoints for both. So kind of have indicating, hey, if you want to change metadata using triggers, use this endpoint, and this is the version attached to that. And if you want to manage content, there is that endpoint. And then accordingly, UCDN would speak to 2 separate endpoints and potentially even with different versions. So you can actually use triggers v1 for configuration and triggers v2 for content. And this is all done through FCI. Next slide. There was a discussion on the mailing list about CDN identifiers. Triggers originally had the document had invested quite a bit into CDN chaining use case and support of that, and kind of propagation of extensions back and forth and so on. Not every use case requires that. There's certainly a lot of use cases there where there's no TCDN, just UCDN and DCDN talk to one another. And also practical deployments do not really use BGP ASN in all cases. So to allow for that, we just made it optional. So if you still do using chaining, you need that, you can have it. But generally, I think there's an ask for broader, and that's not in the scope of this draft, but I think we do need to work on better CDN identifier. So to actually replace it with something that would be workable and then comply with current implementation realities. Next slide. Trigger labels, again, making this manageable. So imagine you're doing a lot of labels, you don't have a lot of triggers, sorry. So you're creating a lot of operations. So that's a mechanism sort of really fashioned after Kubernetes labels here, is that you'll be able to mark labels with custom, mark triggers with custom labels and then monitor just the ones you need. If this is a public CDN that is acting as UCDN, it may be separation by content, their content provider customers, it may be semantics of different content groups or sub grouping of content. Just focus on subset, and especially if you are planning to have a lot of cache management operations, it's certainly very useful feature to kind of create and track triggers using labels. Next. And I think that was the last one. So kind of the API was sort of lacking in terms of manageability, is that, again, if you are doing quite a lot of operations, and now we're allowing quite kind of advanced configuration around execution, what gets executed when, what are dependencies, you need an easy way to capture all of that in one API call. And kind of, again, prior drafts didn't allow for that. To look at all triggers, you have to basically get, first of all, a collection, and then kind of get every trigger one by one. This is far from efficient. So we optionally allowing kind of, first of all, one feature that you can get all labels, all triggers in particular state or in particular label, and get all of their information all together, and then you can filter the way you want, as opposed to iterating one by one, not efficient. And also optionally, we can request for trigger statues and ask for object lists to be embedded in there. And both of them are subject to FCI capability. So if DCDN supports this extended capability, then kind of 2 parties can enjoy the efficient messaging exchange here. Again, both FCI, subject to FCI. That's what I have. So back to you, Jay.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So I'll conclude this by covering what's outstanding and what is next here. So in terms of what is outstanding, really, I think we're in a pretty good state with the draft here. We noticed that there are some minor issues with regard to the cleanup of some older language with regard to CIT trigger command and how it is currently, in some cases, confused with trigger object. We would like to make a modification here to make it more consistent so that the trigger command is actually acting upon the trigger object, but mostly a language-based issue more than anything. Likewise, there's some older language around CIT delete trigger that also needs to be revised as well. But the main thing that I think we need is more reviews. I have a hunch that pretty much the only ones who've really looked at this are likely the RFC authors, and we really could use some additional people reviewing this and posting their comments over to the mailing list, as this would be very, very helpful. So nevertheless, that brings us to next steps. I think we can very easily address these remaining outside issues. Indeed, we need more reviews, and I think we're sitting in a pretty good place to hopefully ask for working group last call fairly soon here. So I guess that's all that I've got for the update. Any questions or comments from anyone? Okay, thank you, everyone. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that this is really good. A lot of progress, and I agree with all the 3 things that you have on the next steps here.
Okay, excellent. All right.
So I think next on the list is CDNI named footprints. Alan?
Yeah, thanks.
Do you want to request to share slides?
How do I do that?
Here. Go. I got him. You can go.
Yeah, okay. I'll ask you to change it. So this is there were 2 iterations in the private draft, and I think it was finally accepted as a group draft. Next slide. So there's not a lot of, I don't think there are any changes in since that certainly work to do here. Just a bit of background and something I guess didn't cover before in discussions that kind of had on the mailing list. The FCIs today is defined in 8008, which treats footprints as attributes of capabilities, really, even though it's named footprints and capabilities. Footprints are not independent objects, but it also this RFC describes push and pull methods for FCI exchange. There's no definition of a real protocol for transporting these objects today. RFC 9241 proposes implementation of CDNI FCI as based on Alto. It's actually extension of Alto protocol that's separately is defined in RFC 7285. And as part of that, it's interesting is that kind of similar approach that what this draft proposes is that it uses kind of addressable footprint, and it uses Alto PID concept to refer to footprints that have become addressable, that kind of 8008 doesn't provide, but it requires use of Alto framework. Separately, what's being developed in the SVTA open caching architecture work, there is separate implementation of FCI, and it's SVTA spec, SVTA 2045. To my knowledge, has not been actually submitted to CDNI as a working draft, but is kind of foundational protocol in the open caching architecture that kind of implements the semantics of 8008 and also follows the same approach of kind of footprints as attributes to capabilities, right? So we kind of have a fork here of approaches, and we have Alto, which kind of I think takes the right approach of provided naming, but fails I think to kind of, and actually brings quite a lot of dependencies. So next slide. So we do need kind of name footprints. There's some multiple use cases that emerge that require footprints to be used within FCI in a named way, but also kind of within in other interfaces. So it's kind of long overdue to have that. And I think I presented the use case before. We can skip that, but there is a need to have them in a more robust, named, and consistent way. So when you're using footprints in different parts of the interface, you actually know that you're talking to the same thing. Next slide. Right. So what the draft provides the framework for footprints advertising that is compatible with non-Alto FCI implementation that provided SVTA. So we don't talk about capabilities, but talk about footprints that would be possible without Alto. And several features that are important: hierarchical structure, namespace support, caching support, kind of complex footprint expression. So the kind of nice feature that I think important and useful. So I think what's important is next. The next slide is that. So that draft has been there. I received comments even on the personal draft first, and getting from Nir that got kind of embedded in the current version. I think Jay provided some comments, so they still need to be worked. I think the important part of this draft is sort of we need to, first of all, in the document, address the need for non-Alto footprint advertising. So kind of this real need that to do this kind of without bringing the whole Alto framework, kind of so you can actually have that without Alto. Incorporate the common comments. So there's, I think, questions specific on specific features like, hey, how do we support very long footprint advertising and so on? So either features or maybe just more language to address those comments. So the work to do. Most important, I think, decision is make a call on how that stands together with broader FCI definition. So there is a CTI document that addresses capabilities advertising in non-Alto way using REST. So do we pursue this as two separate drafts, one for footprints, another for capabilities, or we actually look to merge those two in one CDNI draft? Because again, I think the big missing hole here is that we don't have the non-Alto FCI expressed in SVTA document. We don't have it as CDNI, and that kind of in the CDNI document. So that's a decision to make. I think it's still we can pursue refining the footprints in the meantime. There's certainly work to do there, but I think that kind of for the question for the chairs is that do we see this being concluded and published as separate footprint advertising, or it's rather be done together with capability? That's all I have.
Thanks, Alan. Just a quick comment. I think probably more eyes need to review the document, I feel.
Yes, naturally. I would say that it's early as well. So kind of, yeah. So I would appreciate kind of reviews and comments.
Okay, thank you. A quick time check. We've got about 17 minutes. So this topic, and this includes 3 topics, and then Arnon at the end.
Yes, and we're going to try to blast through this. All right. So this is some general discussion topics for some things that have come up in a number of different places. The first question is we have some third-party references to either products or documents. The HashiCorp, the SVTA, and the AWS, these are all basically the same situation. Yes, I'm going to pause and let Francesca speak.
Hi. I could have waited for you to finish this slide before talking, but since we're running short on time, I just wanted to say that I did bring this to the ASG, and we will be discussing it with the legal counsel tomorrow morning. So I should have an answer for the working group after that.
Awesome.
And I believe that legal counsel is also available, like office hours, sort of in person there, if Sanjay wants to talk to them. But I think that I should have a response for you, so it shouldn't be necessary. But yeah, I didn't have an answer, and now I brought this up. So
excellent. We're going to skip to the down reference problem then, and skip the trademark questions. So yeah, Glenn.
Yeah, I said on the trademark situation, I just realized in one of the specs we reviewed today, there was that AWS v4 auth. Does that fall into this category as well?
Same problem.
I guess we had already flagged that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So all of these also have a separate problem, separate from the trademark question. The trademark question is an absolute bar to releasing, so we have to solve that one. This one theoretically can be discussed, but down references are highly frowned upon. RFC 2026 says standards track specifications normally must not depend on other standard track specifications which are at a lower maturity level, and then it defines other proprietary standards that have come to be widely used may be treated like standards, but it is proprietary and it doesn't qualify as a standards track document. So that means that we should generally, where we can, we should avoid normative references to non-standards track documents. In the event that we need to, we do have an option. There is a mechanism by which to perform that. It does require AD and IESG approval, just like everything else we produce. Ben?
Yeah, so I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I just had once you're finished, come back to me.
Yeah, all good. And so we have, and again, I'm going really quick, sorry. We have kind of three options. We can remove all of our third-party down refs from the document and either standardize them using another forum with a registry. Other people can do that. Or we can do nothing. We could replace them with a suitable open standard where one exists. Some of the things that we might have down reference on may have open standards that we can look at using instead. Or we can note the down reference in the document and work with the IESG on approval. Very brief thoughts. I see Ben.
Yeah. So I see kind of a difference between referencing an external standard and simply mentioning the existence of something. So as an example, I'll use the protected secrets document where we reference HashiCorp Vault, which I think started this whole snowball.
It's one of them, yeah.
And we don't actually use anything from the Vault specification, as it were. We don't use anything about the Vault API. The presence in the document is merely an object that says, here, we're giving you a URL that's pointing towards this thing that happens to be Vault. We just want to identify the type of what this URL is. We're not saying anything about how Vault works or how you interact with that API. It's merely a reference to its existence. And to me, that seems a little bit different than, referencing, like a protocol or something that's actually used by the specification. So that's my brief thought on it. And I guess I would say that if you agree with that additional category, I don't think that really falls under any of the proposed solutions.
Right. I think you're describing a normative versus a non-normative reference. But Francesca?
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that there exist two type of references. There is normative references and informative references. Normative references, to make it simple, I think about the documents that you have to read to understand the current document. And informative references are more like examples and things that could be good to read if you want to, but you can definitely skip them. I haven't read this document in in detail to tell you like if this needs to be normative or informative. If there is terms, what I understood was that there are terms used in this document that come from that, then it needs to be normative because you need to understand the terms, if the terms that you're using. It's not about like a protocol being defined or anything like that. It can be like terminologies. Definitely should be normative reference. And I just want to answer or point out, Chris, that the downref process, it's quite simple, and we do it all the time. So it's not a big deal, sort of, to specify this downref. Of course, we should be careful because we don't want to. If we can avoid downref, it will be better. But we have down references in RFCs all the time, and the process is the following. Basically, the down references are noted during the IETF last call. So the IETF last call will have text that says the following might be downward references, and then that alerts the community that they can object to this downref. Usually there is no objections. And then this goes through the ASG, and the ASG doesn't have to explicitly approve once these down references are last called. But anyway, normative references should be stable specifications. That is important. It should be not the equivalent of work in progress or living standards when possible. So that's something to think about. It needs to be something stable and equivalent to an RFC from other standard organization. Usually is considered fine.
Documentation for a product?
How stable is it, and how open is it? The ISG has
Not
also had
open,
problems
medium
with
stable.
Yeah,
sounds like something to discuss on the list.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
It's it could bring objections. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Ben?
Yeah, I would just say that along those lines, I'm against the remove them option, because I believe that having these references to these widely used services vastly increases the utility of these configuration objects, and removing them just means that people are going to do it anyway, but without doing it the same way, right? So
that's more discussion that we will have to take to the list for time. Thank you. Oh, Francesca?
Last thing. One thing to consider is if having it as informative reference would be fine, and then maybe pull in to the document the parts that that are necessary to read, like the parts that make it a normative reference.
Right. We might be able to just define what a namespace is in this document. So, yeah. Okay. Briefly, we in the CDN, in the not the MEL document, in the processing stages document, it introduces the concept of synthetic responses. And our charter says that we will not define new protocols for delivering content from an CDN end user user agent. And it says that in the section of the charter that authorizes the creation of our metadata, we're allowed to define metadata for the distribution of content, but it does not appear to authorize the metadata for the creation of content. And so I believe this puts the processing metadata draft out of the charter scope. Glenn.
I understand what you're saying, but I think it's a little much. I mean, so a synthetic response could be a response code. That would be okay, right? For you to put it in as configuration metadata, return a 403. But you can't synthesize a response body that has some text in it describing this is a access error or something.
That I believe to be the correct reading. Yes.
I would like to respectfully disagree with the application of that rule, which I understand, to this use case. But
nevertheless, I'm not the only one who thinks this. And moving this document forward may be considerably smoother if we consider amending our charter. And so either we have to remove all the synthetic responses, or we amend our charter, or we continue discussing this on the list. And I'm pretty sure we're going to discuss it on the list.
right, or we would dumb down synthetic response to just be a status code, but not a body, I guess.
Yes, that I would categorize that as removing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
just get into this on the list.
Just a quick interjection. If it makes sense to do maybe an interim call that would give us time to kind of discuss this further, I'm open to that if that would make sense.
Absolutely possible. To you, Sanjay. Call for shepherds.
Okay. So this is the last slide. Here's a quick call out for folks that as we are progressing documents and they get ready to be submitted to the IESG, typically a shepherd write-up is done, which basically describes what this document is, what it is solving, and who is implementing it. It's a simple document, and that typically accompanies the draft when it is sent up to IESG, and the IESG can read that document as a way to sort of quickly familiarize themselves as to what it is that this draft is doing. So the question really here is that for the CDNI working group in the past, we have the chairs have taken that job of writing up a shepherd's document, but typically it is not necessarily that the chairs only do this. So the question here is that if folks are willing to write up a shepherd document, then please volunteer. And I know we're kind of out of time, so I'm not going to take up more time. I can put that up on the mailing list, but essentially that's what I'm asking for.
Please. We've got 3 minutes. Can we have I don't know that we're going to have a whole lot of time for the conversation, but if we can at least present the problem before we go?
Yes.
Arnon? Is Arnon here?
This is Arnon's baby. Is he with us?
I do not see him on the participant list.
Well, then we will discuss this entirely on the list. This is really some questions of exactly how and what the purpose and scope of the private features are, and why this group should consider adopting this document. There's been Kevin put some thought into what, and there's already been some discussion on the list. So we should continue that discussion if we want to progress this document.
Yeah. I think since it might be late for Arnon to stay on, so why don't we take this back in the mailing list and give him the opportunity to respond.
That sounds like a good plan. And with that, does anyone have anything else in the last 2 minutes? Glenn.
I'll put out a thank you to our chairs. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and appreciate everybody sticking in for 2 hours. So I think we have some items that we need to follow up on the mailing list, and if need be, we can think about setting up an interim if we needed to get more face-to-face time. We can set that up like a conference call to discuss that. But let's we can talk that in the mailing list as well to see what's the most effective way for us to come to closure on the issues that, Chris, that you brought up. And also we'll wait to hear from Francesca on her conversation with the legal team.
Indeed.
All right.
I expect lots of good list conversations soon.
Yes. All right. With that, well, thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you over the mailing list.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
And Sanjay, I have captured as much as I could in the doc while we were going, but I spent a lot of the time talking and was unable to capture a lot of my notes.
Right.
I put them in the standard notes doc for here.
So I created the hedge doc. Were you able to see that at all, or no? Or is it just me that's seeing it? Because
I see one. It's this one, dropping it in chat. And that's where I put the notes that I was able to snag.
Where did you send them?
I dropped it into the chat here.
Oh, let me go back to the chat. Looks like I closed it.
I can send it to you separately.
Okay, okay. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is, so it looks like there are two versions. One I created, one you created, huh?
Neat. Well, I'll let you reconcile them.
What's that?
I'll let you reconcile them.
All right. So I'll cut and paste my comments here, and then I think we should be good. So we'll take your document as the document.
Okay. That's the one that popped up when I clicked the note-taking tool.
Okay.
Button.
No, that's good. I don't know why mine showed up here. All right. Let me fix that. I'll do that right now. Very good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. And I'll see you on the list.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Good. Thank you.